Dear students, I welcome you to this lecture. It is all about trial and error learning theory by the famous American psychologist E.L. Thorndike. E.L. Thorndike, the American psychologist, is well regarded as the pioneer of objective psychology. Undoubtedly, he ranks the first who placed much emphasis upon the need for experimental evidence and objective verification in psychology. He is credited with bringing methodological innovations in animal and human experimentation. He carefully described behavior with proper experimental and control conditions. Who can deny the fact that psychology of learning owes its existence to this very man for his scientific study of learning processes? His work on the learning process led to the theory of connectionism and helped to provide a scientific basis for modern educational psychology. History of psychology is witness to the fact that initially it was Thorndike who explained the theory of rewards and punishment. W.F. Hill hails him as the first real reinforcement psychologist, as he incorporated within his objective psychology the law of effect. As a reinforcement psychologist, he firmly established that acts that are rewarded tend to recur, and acts not reinforced or punished tend to become less probable for recurrence. Emphasizing that learning takes place through trial and error, Thorndike evidences that an organism learns by making random and blind efforts, trying one solution after another, till by sheer accident or by exhausting possibilities hits upon the correct response. Thorndike formulated the trial and error model of learning after observing the learning displayed by hungry cats in a puzzle box who were to pull a string in order to escape and have the reward in terms of a fish. His famous cat experiment, widely known and quoted in psychology of learning, helped him to observe that the cat who was motivated to escape tried in a fairly random fashion to do something that would release the door of the puzzle box. After considerable trials and errors, it appeared that the cat accidentally pulled the string that released the door. The successful attempt was reinforced by following it with a reward that was a fish. On subsequent trials, the errors got reduced and eliminated gradually, resulting in the repetition of a reinforced act. As it becomes obvious from the experiment that trial and error involves trying one way to escape, reach the food, or solve a problem, become unsuccessful, and so try another way till the correct solution is achieved or goal is reached. Among the random hits, the correct response which is rewarded is stamped in, that is selected, and the wrong response which is not rewarded is stamped out, or we can say discarded. This is the situation where SR connections, that is stimulus response connections, are formed. The basis of learning accepted by Thorndike is an association between the sense impressions and impulses to action. This association came to be known as bond or connection. Thorndike concludes that it is the process of establishing specific connections between a given situation and a given response and their consolidation. His numerous experiments with his subjects of learning enabled him to lay down the following steps in any process of trial and learning. Number one, it is the presentation of a new situation which is seen as a problem. The next one, natural responses to seek adjustment to a new situation. Hitting upon success by chance after trying a number of unsuccessful ways. Gradual reduction in time and errors in reaching the correct pathways and their ultimate elimination. Repetition of successful attempts. fixation of the correct attempt or solution. Dear students, now let us shift to the theoretical principles that form the core of learning theory given by E.L. Thorndike. Number first, it is learning involves selection and connection. Thorndike, on the basis of his vast amount of findings on the animal experimentation, identified learning as a process of trial and error, preferring to call it as learning by selecting and connecting. He maintained that an organism confronted with a problematic situation indulges in the process of hitting and missing, gives varied or multiple responses, and makes so many false attempts till it finally hits upon the correct move. The correct response which solves the problem is reinforced and hence repeated, resulting in the elimination of the wrong responses. Thorndike maintained that learning is the stamping in of correct responses and stamping out of incorrect responses through a process of trial and error. Thorndike observed that the subjects engaged in more or less random behavior within the puzzle box until one of those behaviors triggered the release of the latch or string, allowing the subject to escape. Upon being returned to the puzzle box, the subject again appeared to engage in the same random type of behavior, but over the series of trials, those behavioral acts that have been immediately followed by the latch release occurred more and more frequently, displacing those others ineffective behaviors until the animal was opening the latch almost immediately upon re-entering the box. Learners, when confront a problem situation, do try so many responses until selecting one that leads to an outcome. Dear students, you might have seen parents engaged in trial and error processes on responding to a crying child when they hug, pat, laugh, give milk, or pay attention to him until they find out what was it that the baby wanted. Here is the second theoretical principle. It is learning is the result of formation of connection. Thorndike's experiments on the animal's escape behavior in the puzzle box demonstrated an association process between a situation and response in trial and error learning. Resting his experimental interests in the establishment of connections between particular stimulus and voluntary behaviors, he bases his theory on three inseparable elements. Number one, the stimulus, which involves an environmental event. Second, the response, which indicates a behavioral act. And the third one is the formation of connection or bond between stimulus and response. Every stimulus is connected with some kind of response. This makes the building block or structure of behavior. Thorndike maintained that learning is a matter of bond formation, the formation and strengthening of neural connections between sense impressions and impulses to action. It is the stimulus that affects the organism and generates response. Symbolically, the connections formed are illustrated as SR. These associations are termed as bond or connection. Thorndike emphatically writes that learning is the result of the formation of connection in the nervous system between the stimulus and response. Thorndike declares in 1931 that learning is connecting. The mind is man's connection system. He firmly establishes that strengthening or weakening of these bonds or connections results in the making or breaking of the habits. It is on this very fact that Thorndike stressed so much on the formation of the bonds as a prerequisite for learning. His system is called as connectionism, bond psychology, or as Anderson puts it, a bond theory of learning. When an organism is said to have learned, Thorndike says that it is essentially the formation of a connection or bond. Here is the next principle. Learning is incremental, not insightful. On the basis of his observations and experimentations, Thorndike declared that learning is the result of several moves, steps, attempts, and trials. The successful moments which lead to goal are reinforced and hence selected for further practice. This is a progressive elimination of irrelevant, unsuccessful attempts. Thorndike named such improvement in performance as incremental. The solution of a problem does not strike the mind at once. It is an outcome of several trials that an organism is involved in. Putting it differently, trial and error refers to the gradual accumulation of correct responses through a slow process of trying out all sorts of possibilities and slowly weeding out the ones that don't work. From his observation with regard to trial and error learning, Thorndike affirmed that as long as the number of trials increased, the random, irrelevant, false and erroneous activities decreased gradually. He observed that the cat learned the correct way of manipulating the string out of its random moments. Thorndike states, and gradually all the non-successful responses will be stamped out, and the practical impulse leading to the successful act will be stamped in by the resulting pleasure, until after many trials the cat will, when put in the box, immediately color the button or opinion a definite way. Thorndike repeatedly placed the animal in the same puzzle box and measured how long it took them to escape. And what he found was that the time to escape decreased gradually. That is, the latency to escape and get food would decrease over successive trials. Here is another theoretical principle. Learning is direct and mechanical. The hallmark of connectionism is that learning could be adequately explained without referring to any unobservable internal states. Emphasizing on his observed phenomenon that learning comes by chance, Thorndike did not acknowledge any role to cognition. As a strong behaviorist, he upholds the view that learning is direct, not mediated by thinking, reasoning, and other mental functioning. While conducting experiments on hungry cats who were to learn to escape and get food, Thorndike measured the latency to escape and found that over trials latency declined. The gradual nature of the curve convinced Thorndike that the animals had not formed a rational understanding of the situation, but rather that the food reward gradually stamped in an association between cues in the puzzle box and escape. The escape from the puzzle box neither exhibited any signs of intelligence or displayed any evidence of insight. Thorndike formalized his belief in his law of effect. When a response is repeatedly being followed by a satisfying state of affairs, that response will increase in frequency. Learning becomes a matter of establishing a connection between sensory stimuli and the appropriate responses, and there involves no rule of one's understanding. An organism learns blindly, mechanically, and randomly. Regarding learning as a mechanical and blind process, devoid of intelligence or conscious determination, Thorndike believed that an animal learns to reach the goal prompted by blind impulses. Learning, therefore, is a trial and error process. Highlighting and emphasizing the mechanical basis of learning, Thorndike, while referring his classic cat experiment, writes in 1911, the cat does not look over the situation, much less think it over and then decide what to do. It bursts out at once into the activities helped by instincts and experience. Going through all the discussed theoretical principles of SR learning, it becomes clear that Thorndike, as a staunch behaviorist, offers a direct interpretation of the phenomenon, an interpretation that does not require postulating mental events intervening between a stimulus input and the response output. Gradler has pointed out that the importance of Thorndike's research is to include the effects of the subject's action among the causes of behavior change. A connection is made between the stimulus of an environment, the behavior, and the consequence. Thorndike posited that a man's intellect, character, and skill is the sum of his tendencies to respond to situations and elements of situations. And it is the different situation response connections that make up this sum of the world. He was interested in the doctrine of association between sensation and impulses. Learning, according to him, can be explained as a series of connections between the environmental stimuli and behaviors, followed by reinforcing consequence, governed by the law of effect, law of exercise, and law of readiness. Dear students, let us pack up here, hoping that you might have understood the basic crux, the basic essence of trial and error learning theory of Thorndike. Thanks.